So this is a basic introduction to Maya, or at least the Maya interface, so you can get a general idea of all the different parts that are involved in it. What I want to do is just take you through literally from the very first steps, which are the basic menu parts, so you can just get a view of all the different things that you can use. And really there's only about 10 or 12 different parts to Maya that you use 90% of the time. So the first thing to see is the menu up here. It's the standard menu where you've got all your different parts. So file for opening and saving, for editing, etc. So all the things you normally expect. You've got different menus for depending on what you want to do. For the most part, we'll just be using modeling, but you do have rigging and animation and effects. When you change these, you'll notice the menu at the top will change. So really just stay in modeling, and what you might find is if somebody's been using the computer and you've come back to it, and some of these have changed, often it's because of this has been changed to something else, and a couple of maybe your modeling files like mesh tools and edit mesh might disappear if it's been put onto rigging, which will have skin and skeleton instead. But we'll stay in modeling for now. Normal sort of things you've got here, you've got undo and redo, save, opening files, and new scene, a few other things here as well, which I'll go into, some of the shortcuts. You also have the shelf here, so these are shortcuts for tools depending on what you're doing. Again, we're doing polygon modeling mainly, so I can click on one of these and I can create a sphere, click on it and I can create a cube which will be in there somewhere. There it is. So a lot of these are shortcuts that you can use for your tool modeling. There's also a custom shelf as well. This is my custom shelf that I use. It's got a couple of scripts in it, bits and pieces that I use all the time. You can build up a shelf, you can add things in, you just put Control and Shift, and if I want to add in, say, add divisions, I can just hold down Control and Shift and then click on that and it'll add it into my shelf. And if I want to get rid of it, you can just middle click and drag it to the bin, wherever the bin went, or wherever the bin went, I don't know. I'll find that later on. Let's have a look. There used to be a bin, but it's disappeared now. So there you go, just right click and just delete it. There we go. So so that's the custom shelf, and there's very different object modes in here, which I'll go into. Your move tools, selection tools, scaling, etc. over here, channels and stuff. So the easiest thing to do is to show you how this works by using an actual object. So there's also a thing called the marking menu. If you hold down spacebar, you get a sort of reduced menu or condensed menu. It just has everything in it. I tend to use the marking menu, so I tend to I learned how to use Maya a long time ago. A lot of people don't bother using this, but it's quite handy if it's just a little bit quicker. It's exactly the same set of options as I've got up here, well, same set of menus, but it's just in this condensed form. It's up to you whether you want to use it or not. And there's often many different ways of doing the same thing in Maya depending on how you want to work. So at the moment we want to be in the polygon shelf. If I want to create a cube, I can just create one just by clicking this, and there you can see the sphere, cube, cylinder, cone, etc., and just click on any of these. Sometimes you can end up in curves and NURB surfaces, so you might create a surface like this by accident because you're in curves and surfaces. Surfaces aren't something that people normally use in games for various different reasons. There are ways of generating them, but they don't normally bring them in as models. Normally everything's done as polygons. So polygons is the way to go, but if stuff starts acting weird and looks a bit different than normal, sometimes it's because you've created one of these surfaces by accident. What we want are polygons. I'll take a cube. Now in here, a cube is made of, all polygon objects are made of the same set of things. So if I can right click over it if I want to select those parts that it's made of, or I can go into the different object modes here. So I'll just do this one for the time being. Okay, so this is component mode in here. Let's just check that. So select by component type. And this cube is made up of components. So the components it's made up of are vertices, which can move around corners. It's also made up of, and I can change the type of component that it's made up of. Let's just open this up. I can change it. They're actually listed here. So I have, let's have a look, UVs in there, which I can go into, edges and faces. Now, as I said, there's a couple of different ways of selecting these, and that's one of them. I can also right click on them, so I can select by vertex, right click and drag, and I can select by vertex. I can also right click and drag and select edge and face, and go back to object mode as well, which sends us back into the general mode. So it's a little bit like, imagine if it was a human being. Imagine you had the ability to just flick a switch and be able to put your hand in and grab at somebody's skeleton things, and just be able to get inside and move stuff around, and then flick a switch, and then you're not able to do that anymore. And as you can see, I've gone back into object mode and I can't select the individual parts. So it's here at the moment. I need to click on that, and that'll get me back into these individual parts, and that I can get into the kind of bones or the guts of the actual object in order to manipulate it. So I can use the move tool, the manipulator here, and I can move the parts of the object around. So as I say, I can grab these parts, I can move them about, and I've used the right mouse button to select those parts, or as I say, I can move these two. Now this one here is sometimes catches people out. Let's just go back to object mode. This is for groups. So let's say I have this object here, and I can Control D and I can duplicate it, and I can create a group by pressing Control G. You don't need to really worry about what I'm doing at the moment, but I'm just explaining what this button is. Now I can select these objects individually, but maybe I've got like a forest with hundreds of trees in. I don't want to be going around and grabbing all the trees and selecting them. What you normally do is a shift select, and you'll grab one thing and then another, and then it'll add to the selection when I hit shift. Sometimes what I want to do is just select on an object, but also select its entire group as well. So I would use this button in that instance, and if I click on that, I click on both of those. It's not so important right now, but it is if you're getting confused. It's one of those ones that people don't realise they've selected. They want to pick up an object, maybe they've created a sphere and a cone, and they can't understand why every time they click on it they select everything. Have a look up here, and then you'll see that you just need to select this object mode rather than the full group mode. So that's one of those. This is really important, these three buttons, and getting an idea of how object, component and the group mode actually works. Or if it's group mode, it's like hierarchy and combinations groups basically. Let's have a look. So let's keep going. We're going to have the toolbox down here. Now I've got I can move because I've got the move tool selected here. I can rotate, so I can rotate it round, and I can also scale as well. So it's these three here, the main ones that you use. Because you use them so much, often people will use the shortcuts. So that's just selection. Doesn't do anything. I can just raycast and drag here. There's also the lasso tool that I can use to select as well. So what I want to do is say if I want to move things really quickly, instead of going back here, clicking and selecting the move tool and moving, and then selecting the rotate tool and rotating, what I'll do is I'll use the shortcuts. So Q is to select, W is for moving, E is for rotating, and R is for scaling. You'll find that when you're modeling things, you're using those a lot, and that's the same thing when I go into the component mode. If I select a face and I want to rotate it, it's exactly the same thing. I use the same method for those as well. So I'll just go back into object mode. Now over here is the channel box, and what that does, it tells me where things are in space. At the moment what we have is the origin. Now the origin is this thing in the middle. It's 0, 0, 0, which means 0 in X, 0 in Y, and 0 in Z space. Now if I select all those, shift select and just press 0, the center of this object will sit exactly on the origin, and when I move, if you notice on this right hand side, those numbers keep changing. Now I can manipulate this, so I can put this Y is up, and oops, so Y is up, X, yeah, normally Z, which is blue, normally Z is what people consider as depth. So they'll call things, you know, it's used for things like Z buffer, Z depth, and that's usually the space from the camera or the viewer outwards into space, and X is usually a sort of panning left, right, up and down, or sort of left and right. So that's what I do. But it depends on the model, the way the model works, and the world space. You don't really have to worry too much about Z depth and X and Z and stuff too much. What this does though is it gives us an ability to manipulate this. So if I want to move it 2 units up in the air, I can type in 2 in the Y axis and it'll shift 2 up in the air. If I want to shift 2 into positive Z space, it'll move towards me there, and I can put -2 and it'll move 2 blocks away, and you'll notice that it corresponds with this grid. So if I press 0, it goes to the middle, press 3, and it'll move 3 spaces. What that does is it gives us a coordinate system for everything. It gives us a coordinate system for animating, for calculating the size of things, calculating how far things are away from each other, and it's really, really important. And it's something that you'll use certainly when you're animating, and it's something that's really important when you're working in game. Everything has to know where it is, especially in game where you've got maybe NPCs and loads of other objects that are flying around an environment. You need to know where these objects are, they need to know where everything else is. So using this space and having an origin means that everybody has a kind of meeting point, which they say, well, you know, if I've got 2 player characters or 2 NPCs, I want one that's 3 meters to the left of the origin, one that's 3 meters to the right of the origin, and it just means I can place them. I've got actual coordinates. There are major problems when that coordinate system breaks or it's not properly set up. So definitely keep an eye on this on the channel box, because it's the most useful thing. So in terms of rotation, we've got rotate, and you can see that those change there. So if I want to rotate around the Y axis, well, 90 degrees you're not going to notice, but 45 you would, and 45. You can see that I'm rotating this object by 45 degrees in all axes, and it's rotating. As I move it, you can see that. And scale is pretty self-explanatory as well. So one of the things you can do with a channel box is if I select those channels, or I can select a channel by clicking in this space. If I hold down B, I can B and middle mouse button, I can change the channels that way, or I can just use the manipulator here. Like I said, it's one of those things where there's multiple ways of doing things in Maya. There's not any one best way, it's just the way you prefer to do it. So that's scaling in there, and so it means we can manipulate all of these things using the channel box. It's a really handy thing to do if you want to do things really accurately as well. It also gives us an idea of relative scale as well, because if I scale things up by like 100 and I pull back, this to me looks like a standard cube, just like the one we've got, but it's like 100 meters tall, so I can check the scale of things in there. Take it back down to our scale, so normal scale of 1. There's a couple of things as well. if let's have a look. I want to, so I want to, let's just close that for a second. If I double click on this tool, the move tool, what I'll get is the move tool options, and it's giving me an axis orientation. So one of the things that confuses a lot of people, it's what this is saying is there's two different types of space. There's world space, well, there's a few different types of space, but mainly world and object space. And the way things move, say if I'm moving things in world space, you'll notice that if I just rotate it on its side like this, and then I move back to the move tool, you notice that the axes are in line with the world, which is great. That's fine. It means I can move things left and right, up and down. That all makes sense. If I change this to object, you'll notice that the axes change to the orientation of the object. Now this is really, really handy for certain situations. If I just want to move something, if I'm like animating something so that I want to move it flying through the air, and I want it, if it was a bullet, say, if I'm going to change this to being kind of bullet, well, longer anyway, and I want it to move along its long axis here, I would move it in object space, simply because if I move it in world space, it's really hard to work out if it's going in the right direction or not. I might have it in the right direction, I might not. So sometimes moving things in object or object space can be a lot easier to do. So there's a couple of different types of things, but sometimes that confuses people as well. So we just go back to world space in here. Let's have a look. There's a few panels here, so we've got 4 panels, so with the names, top, perspective, side and front, and pretty much as they say they are. The orthographic ones are the ones which have no perspective on, which are the top and the front and the side are all orthographic, and the perspective is the one we're using there. Now by tapping on the by tapping on the space bar, I can toggle between these different modes. There's a few different ones. There's the outliner one here, so I can see all my cameras. I can see my group with my objects in there. I've got the graph editor. You're not going to need this one because it's not. It's mainly for animation. Well, it is entirely for animation, so it's not going to be anything useful for you. What else have we got? Yeah, you got the hypershade one there as well for texturing, and there's multiple ones with the hypergraph and things, and the graph editor as well. Again, these two ones you're not really going to have to use that much, so we can just go back. The main ones you want to use are these main panels, the top panel and the 4 panels that you've got here. The other thing you've got is layers. So I don't have any layers created, but if I wanted to, I can just create a new layer in here. I can right click and add an object to that layer, and then I can just do things like hide it. I can change it so that it's so that I can't edit it, for instance. If I go to there, oh, hang on. So I can change it to let's have a look, to the different modes. So I've got reference mode in there, and I've got like a wireframe mode in here, and then the standard mode where I can select it. So I can do various different things using layers as well. It's good if you've got really, really complex scenes, loads and loads of objects. You'll want to be able to hide certain sections and be able to work on others. So having things in layers is really handy, especially if you've got a character. You want to be able to hide the character and all the rigor that comes with it. So that's definitely something you want to sort of play around with when your scenes get much more complicated. Up here you've got the rendering modes and things. Again, not really going to need those because you're not using you're going to be using a game engine, so you're not really going to use these much, but you will use things like the hypershade, which we looked at before, which is, where's the hypershade gone? Down here, where we apply materials to our textures, to our models. So if I can take everything, I can change the color of it, changing it in the hypershade here. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it's for now it's not that important. So one of the things I would do is just have a play around in world space here. What we're doing is I'm holding down Alt, I'm using the middle mouse button to pan, I'm using the left mouse button to orbit, and I'm using the right mouse button to zoom it in and out. And that's the way you normally get around the scene and be able to have a look at stuff. And that's just it for now. I mean, that's pretty much does it in terms of the stuff you need to know for the interface for now. And we'll get into sort of creating bits and pieces in the next video.